Hello, and welcome back to another installment of the Daily Economic Update. Today's subject is going to be the U.S. dollar, the U.S. dollar reserve system, and how this system benefits greatly the United States of America, really at the expense of the rest of the world. You can follow along, as always, by following the link above to the PDF of this PowerPoint presentation. I would also strongly suggest, if you are somewhat new to these subjects, to watch or at least look through the PowerPoint presentation. Again, the link is up above. It's called Credit Debt Video. Click on that link above, and in there is a link to the PDF for that presentation. A lot of what I'm going to work on here kind of builds off of the idea of the credit debt system that's been in control of this world for the past couple hundred years. So let's move on here. This first slide is, as typical Americans, I know this was true of myself, and I think it's true of probably 95% of Americans. This is the way they view the world of money as it goes to international trade and purchase of things across county or country lines. They see the U.S. dollar as bigger than the rest of the currencies. Here we have the yen, the euro, and the British sterling pound, and pretty much all the other currencies of the world. The U.S., typical U.S. citizen sees, the U.S. dollar is bigger than the rest of them. The rest of the world is lucky to get our U.S. dollars. We produce the most, we're the most productive people, and if we look over here, the rest of these currencies are operating on a fair playing field, between the U.S. dollar and the rest of these. It's all an open, fair playing field, and the U.S. dollar just is better. People choose to have the U.S. dollar. That's the assumption most Americans live under. Unfortunately, as is with most things, that's not how it exactly works. This is how the U.S. dollar reserve system works. You have to separate the U.S. dollar as the sovereign currency of the United States and the U.S. dollar system, which operates globally. Within the U.S. dollar system, we have the U.S. dollar, which is synonymous with oil, with most food products, sugar, grains, gasoline, gold, silver. Pretty much all commodities are denominated in U.S. currency. This means that if you are in Japan, if you're a Japanese citizen or a corporation or whatever, and you want to buy oil from Kuwait, you have to use U.S. dollars to pay Kuwait for that oil. The way the system is set up is that Kuwait cannot directly sell that oil to Japan or to France or to anybody else. The country that's doing the buying must first buy U.S. dollars. So that pretty much goes for almost all commodities. Once that transaction happens, so if Japan wants to buy oil from Kuwait, they either have to use reserves of U.S. dollars that they already have, or they have to go out to the market and get U.S. dollars. They pay Kuwait those U.S. dollars. Kuwait gives, let's say it's France, the oil. Now Kuwait is sitting on all of these U.S. dollars. They only have a few options as to what they can do with that, with those U.S. dollars. Further along in this presentation, I'm going to go into more detail as to how the system evolved over the years. But the way the system is set up now, Kuwait really only has one option. They can buy U.S. debt with those dollars. They basically recycle those dollars back to the United States, and they buy U.S. debt. Whenever the government overspends, it has to go out and get people to invest in the United States and to buy our debt. So when you hear that the government overspent by $1.7 trillion this year, this is how it's being done. Basically, foreign countries are coming in and buying our debt with basically recycled money. I'm going to go into much more detail as to why this is. So why is the dollar the reserve currency of the world? How did this whole thing get started? You have to go back to 1945 and the end of World War II. Following the war, the United States was kind of the last man standing. We had most of the manufacturing capacity left in the world. We were the largest oil producer in the world. We had a workforce that at the time, I really do believe was one of the most productive in the world. Automotive, and we had a lot of innovation, and that the people here, I think, really were a very productive, industrious people. The rest of the world was left in shambles. You have to go back even a little bit further in looking at the causes of the Great Depression. Prior to the U.S. dollar system, it was the English system. The British sterling pound was the reserve currency of the world. In its day, prior to the Great Depression, it denominated most world commodities. That system ended in the 1930s and is cited as one of the major contributors to the worldwide Great Depression. As that system broke apart, international trade broke down, trade wars broke out, and lots of bad things happened. But our system started at the end of World War II. As the war came to a close, or it became obvious that the United States and the Allies were going to become victorious, there was fear that the Great Depression would reassert itself. The Great Depression, regardless of what you've been taught in the schools, the Great Depression only ended because of the massive government spending prior to World War II, and then obviously throughout the war. That is how the employment problem was licked, putting people to work building tanks and ammunition plants and whatnot. Later on, I'll show you some graphs of government spending throughout the Great Depression, but especially in 1940, 1941. That's where governmental spending went ballistic. So basically, they were afraid of the Great Depression taking a hold. The eventual victors of World War II met in a place called Bretton Woods, which is here in the United States, to discuss a system to replace the British sterling pound. Europe's in shambles, Japan's in shambles. The world is trying to rebuild itself, and there's really no system of international trade following World War II. So they come up with what's called the Bretton Woods Agreements, or I'm sorry, it's the Bretton Woods Accords. This sets in place a system where the U.S. dollar is the centerpiece of international trade. So all commodities are denominated in U.S. dollars, and this allows the world to start in the rebuilding process.